Bride publicly shamed a girl at her wedding, unaware she is her rich husband's lost daughter. If you love emotional, unforgettable stories that stay with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got so many more coming your way. The silence shattered like glass. One moment, 200 of New York's elite sat in perfect rows, watching Brielle Hartman make her grand entrance down the rose-petal aisle. The next moment, every eye turned to a small figure stumbling through the manicured hedges of the Langford Estate Gardens. A little girl, maybe 10 years old, wearing a faded pink dress that had seen better days and clutching something in her tiny fist. The string quartet faltered. Notes hung in the air like broken promises. Brielle stopped dead in her tracks, her $20,000 Vera Wang gown suddenly feeling like armor she wasn't sure she needed. This was supposed to be her moment. Her perfect day, her fairy tale ending with Matthew Langford, billionaire, philanthropist, and the most eligible bachelor she'd ever managed to snare. But now this child was ruining everything. The girl's eyes swept across the sea of shocked faces until they landed on the altar. On Matthew. Her voice, small but determined, cut through the tension like a knife. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Matthew?" Matthew Langford, 53 years old and worth more money than most small countries, felt his heart stop. Something about her voice, something familiar that he couldn't quite place. Before he could respond, Brielle's perfectly manicured hand shot up like a traffic cop. Her smile was razor-sharp, designed to cut. "Oh, sweetheart," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness that fooled no one. "I think you're a little lost. This isn't a public park, honey. This is a private wedding." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the crowd. Some guests pulled out their phones. This would be social media gold. The little girl's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't back down. She held up what Matthew could now see was an envelope, wrinkled and worn, like it had been carried for miles. "I have a letter," she said, her voice wobbling but brave. "For Mr. Matthew. From my mommy." Brielle's laugh was like breaking crystal. "A letter? Oh, that's precious." She turned to the audience like a performer hitting her mark. "Ladies and gentlemen, apparently we have a little scammer on our hands. Did someone forget to hire better security?" The laughter grew louder, crueler. But Matthew wasn't laughing. He was staring at the child with an expression that made Brielle's stomach clench with something that felt dangerously like fear. The little girl's eyes filled with tears, but she lifted her chin with a dignity that belonged to someone much older. "My mommy said to give this to Mr. Matthew Langford. She said he would want to know." "Know what exactly?" Brielle's voice had lost all pretense of sweetness now. It was pure ice. "That you're here to ruin our wedding with some sob story? That you think you can walk into our lives and demand money?" The crowd was eating it up. This was better than reality TV. But then Matthew's voice cut through the chaos like thunder. "Stop." Every head turned. The billionaire philanthropist who had charmed his way through boardrooms and galas, who had never raised his voice in public, was staring at his bride-to-be with something that looked like horror. "Let her speak." Brielle's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fury blazing in her eyes. "Matthew, don't be ridiculous. She's obviously—" "I said let her speak." The little girl looked up at him with hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "My mommy's name was Lila Chun. She said you knew each other a long time ago, before I was born." Matthew's face went white as fresh snow, and Brielle's world began to crumble. "Lila Chun." Matthew whispered the name like a prayer, like a confession, like something sacred he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it was just a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was a memory. A beautiful, painful memory of a woman with dark hair and gentle eyes who had loved him when he was just Matthew, not Matthew Langford the billionaire. Before the family pressure, before the expectations, before everything went wrong. "You know her?" The little girl's voice was so hopeful it made his chest ache. Brielle stepped forward, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Matthew, whatever this is, we can deal with it after." "Yes." His voice cracked on the single word. "I knew your mother." The crowd erupted in whispers. Phone cameras captured every moment of what was supposed to be Brielle's perfect day dissolving into chaos. Matthew walked down the altar steps like a man in a trance. Each step felt like it carried the weight of 10 years of wondering, of searching, of regretting choices he couldn't take back. He knelt in front of the little girl until they were eye level. This close, he could see it. The shape of her eyes, the stubborn set of her chin. features he recognized from looking in the mirror every morning. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Elena." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Elena Chun." The name hit him like a physical blow. Elena. The name Lila had whispered to him once, curled up in his arms after they'd spent the night talking about their future. About the children they might have someday. About the little girl she hoped to name after her grandmother. Can I see the letter?" Elena nodded and pressed the envelope into his hands. It was soft from handling, like she'd been carrying it for a very long time. Matthew's hands shook as he opened it. The handwriting was definitely Lila's. Those careful, precise letters he remembered from love notes she used to slip into his jacket pockets. "My dearest Matthew, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Elena has found you. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry for so many things. When I left 10 years ago, I was pregnant, but I didn't know how to tell you. Your family made it clear I wasn't good enough for their son. I was just a struggling artist, and you were destined for so much more. I thought I was protecting you from having to choose between your family and me. I was wrong. Elena is your daughter. She has your eyes, your smile, and your stubborn streak. She's smart and brave and everything good about both of us. I tried to reach out so many times over the years, but fear always stopped me. Fear that you'd moved on. Fear that you wouldn't want us. Fear that I'd already hurt you too much. The cancer is getting worse, and I don't have much time left. Elena will need someone who can love her the way she deserves. I know it's not fair to ask this of you after all these years, but she's your daughter, Matthew. And despite everything, I never stopped believing you're a good man. Please don't let her end up in the system. Please don't let her think she wasn't wanted. I'm sorry for the secrets. I'm sorry for the time we lost. But I'm not sorry for Elena. She's the best thing I ever did. Love always. Lila. P.S. She loves chocolate chip cookies and bedtime stories. She's afraid of thunderstorms, but brave about everything else. She's never met her father, but she's always wanted to. Matthew's vision blurred. The letter fell from his trembling hands as the truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just any little girl. This was his little girl. His daughter. The child he'd never known existed. The family he'd been searching for without even realizing it. He looked up at Elena, who was watching him with the same hopeful expression that was breaking his heart into a million pieces. "Elena," he whispered, "I'm your daddy." Behind him, Brielle's bouquet hit the ground with a soft thud. "Are you out of your mind?" Brielle's voice cut through the garden like a whip crack, shattering the tender moment between father and daughter. Her face was flushed red beneath her perfect makeup, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. 200 guests held their breath. Matthew slowly stood, placing a protective hand on Elena's shoulder. "Brielle, I know this is unexpected." "Unexpected?" She laughed, but there was nothing funny about the sound. It was bitter, sharp, dangerous. "Matthew, this is our wedding day. Our wedding day. And you're ready to throw it all away for some random child with a convenient sob story?" Elena shrank back, pressing closer to Matthew's legs. The little girl who had been so brave moments before was now trembling like a leaf in a storm. "She's not some random child," Matthew said quietly. "She's my daughter, according to a letter that anyone could have forged." Brielle's voice rose with each word. "Use your brain, Matthew. This is obviously a scam. Some desperate woman probably saw your engagement announcement in the papers and coached this kid to show up and play on your heartstrings." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some guests nodded along with Brielle's logic. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as they watched the scene unfold. Matthew's jaw tightened. "Her mother is dead, Brielle. So she claims. But where's the proof? Where's the death certificate? The DNA test? The hospital records?" Brielle stepped closer, her wedding dress rustling around her like armor. "I've seen women like that before. Desperate, manipulative creatures who target wealthy men with fake pregnancy scares and mysterious children." Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears. "My mommy wasn't lying. She showed me pictures of you together. She said you were the kindest man she ever knew." Brielle turned on the child with venom in her eyes. "Oh, how convenient. Pictures that mysteriously didn't make it into your little performance today. Tell me, sweetheart, how much money did the person who sent you here promise you?" "Brielle." Matthew's voice thundered across the garden. "That's enough." But Brielle was beyond reason now. 3 years. 3 years she'd spent positioning herself as the perfect trophy wife. 3 years of charity galas and business dinners, and playing the part of the devoted fiancé. 3 years of investment in a future that some dirty little street child was trying to steal from her. No, Matthew, it's not enough. Don't you see what's happening here? This is extortion. This child and whoever sent her are trying to ruin our marriage before it even begins. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying across the garden like a prosecutor making her closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're all taking notes, because this is what gold digging looks like in the 21st century. They don't even wait for the wedding to be over anymore before they start making their demands. Several guests looked uncomfortable now, but others were nodding along. Brielle had always been persuasive, always knew exactly what to say to get people on her side. Matthew felt sick. This was the woman he'd been about to marry. This cruel, heartless person who could look at a frightened child and see nothing but a threat to her bank account. She's 10 years old, he said quietly. Old enough to be coached. Old enough to memorize a script. Brielle's eyes were wild now, her perfect composure completely shattered. Matthew, I'm begging you. Don't let them manipulate you like this. Think about what you're throwing away. Elena tugged on Matthew's jacket with a tiny hand. When he looked down, her face was streaked with tears. I can go, she whispered. I don't want to make trouble. Mommy said if you didn't want me, I should go to the children's home. It's okay. The words hit Matthew like a physical blow. This brave little girl, his little girl, was ready to walk away rather than cause problems. Just like her mother had done 10 years ago. Not again. He wouldn't lose his family again. He knelt down and pulled Elena into his arms, feeling her small body shake with silent sobs. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly, his voice carrying across the silent garden. You're my daughter, and you belong with me. When he stood up, still holding Elena, Brielle was staring at him with an expression of pure fury. So that's it, she hissed. You're choosing her over me? Over everything we've built together? Over our future? Matthew looked at the woman he'd been about to marry, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. Had she always been this cold? This selfish? Had he been so blinded by her beauty and charm that he'd never noticed the ice in her heart? I'm choosing my daughter, he said simply. Brielle's face contorted with rage. Fine, but don't come crawling back to me when you realize what a mistake you've made. When you figure out that this little brat is nothing but trouble. When you remember that I was the one who was there for you, who supported your career, who made you look good at every event and gala. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising to a shriek. You all see this, right? You see how easily a man can be manipulated by a pretty sob story? How quickly he'll throw away everything real for some fantasy. But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. The tide had turned. What had started as curiosity and amusement was now discomfort and disgust. They weren't watching a gold digger get exposed. They were watching a woman reveal her true, ugly nature. Matthew adjusted his hold on Elena, who had buried her face against his shoulder. The wedding is off, he announced quietly. Brielle's scream of rage echoed across the garden like a siren. But Matthew was already walking away, carrying his daughter toward a future he'd never imagined but suddenly couldn't wait to discover. The silence that followed Matthew's announcement was deafening. 200 guests sat frozen in their seats, witnessing the complete implosion of what was supposed to be the society wedding of the year. Some fumbled for their phones, desperate to capture this moment for social media. Others simply stared, their mouths hanging open in shock. Matthew walked slowly down the aisle, Elena still in his arms, her face buried against his shoulder. Each step felt like a choice, not just away from Brielle, but towards something he'd been unconsciously searching for his entire life. His daughter, his flesh and blood, the child he'd never known existed, but who fit in his arms like she'd always belonged there. Matthew. Brielle's voice cracked like a whip behind him. Matthew, you stop right there. He didn't turn around. You think you can just walk away from me? From this? Her voice was getting higher, more desperate. I am Brielle Hartman. Do you know what I gave up for you? Do you know how many men would kill to be with me? Still, he kept walking. Elena lifted her head slightly, her dark eyes, his eyes, looking back at the chaos they were leaving behind. Is she always that loud? She whispered. Despite everything, Matthew felt his lips twitch with the ghost of a smile. I'm starting to think so. They reached the back of the garden, where Matthew's best man, his childhood friend David, was waiting with an expression of complete bewilderment. Matt, what the hell? David. Matthew's voice was calm, steady. Can you handle things here? Make sure the vendors get paid, the guests get home safely. But what about? David gestured helplessly toward the altar, where Brielle was now surrounded by her bridesmaids, all of them talking at once in urgent, hushed tones. What about her? Matthew asked quietly. David stared at his friend, really stared at him, and something in Matthew's expression made him nod slowly. Yeah, man, I've got it. Matthew squeezed his friend's shoulder gratefully, then continued toward the house, still carrying Elena. Behind them, Brielle's voice rose to a shriek that could probably be heard 3 counties over. This isn't over, Matthew. You hear me? This isn't over. You'll regret this. You'll regret choosing some lying little brat over a woman who actually loves you. Elena flinched at the cruel words, but Matthew just held her tighter. Don't listen to her, sweetheart, he murmured. Some people say ugly things when they're angry. It doesn't make them true. They entered the mansion through the back terrace, away from the chaos of the garden. The house was eerily quiet. All the staff were outside managing the wedding, leaving them completely alone. Matthew set Elena down gently in his study, a warm room lined with books and filled with comfortable leather furniture. She looked impossibly small perched on the edge of his massive desk chair, her legs swinging nervously. Are you hungry? He asked. Thirsty? I could ask the kitchen to make you something. She shook her head, then looked up at him with those heartbreakingly familiar eyes. Are you really my daddy? The question hit him like a physical blow. He knelt down in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. Yes, he said simply. I really am. But you didn't know about me. It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes possessed. No, he admitted. I didn't know. If I had. He trailed off, not sure how to explain 10 years of complicated adult decisions to a 10-year-old girl. Mommy said she tried to tell you, but she got scared. Elena's voice was small but steady. She said your family didn't like her very much. Matthew closed his eyes, feeling the weight of old guilt settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. His parents. His controlling, image-obsessed parents who had made it crystal clear that Lila Chun, a struggling artist from the wrong side of town, would never be good enough for their son. He'd been younger then, weaker, more concerned with pleasing his family than following his heart. When Lila had suddenly disappeared from his life, he'd been devastated, but he'd also been too proud to chase after her, too convinced that if she'd really loved him, she would have stayed and fought for them. He'd never imagined she was carrying his child. She was right, he said quietly. My family, they can be difficult. But that was my fault, not hers. I should have been stronger. I should have protected her better. Elena studied his face with the intensity of someone much older than her years. Mommy said you were the kindest man she ever knew. She said even when things went wrong, it wasn't because you were mean. It was because sometimes life is just hard. Matthew felt his throat tighten. Even after everything, after years of separation and silence, Lila had protected his memory, had made sure their daughter didn't hate the father she'd never met. Your mother was an extraordinary woman, he said, and I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. For either of you. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her small hands folded in her lap. The lady in the pretty dress, she said finally. She was really mad. Matthew's jaw tightened. Yes, she was. She called me a liar. She was wrong. She said I was trying to steal you away from her. Matthew reached out and gently took Elena's small hands in his much larger ones. Elena, look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his. You didn't steal anything. You're my daughter. You're exactly where you belong. For the first time since she'd appeared in the garden, Elena smiled, a small, tentative thing, but real. Really, really. Outside, they could hear car doors slamming as guests began to leave. Voices carried on the wind, some sympathetic, some scandalized, all of them buzzing with the gossip that would dominate New York society circles for months to come. Matthew didn't care. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. What happens now? Elena asked. Matthew smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn all day. Now, he said, we figure out how to be a family. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Matthew's study, Elena curled up in the oversized leather armchair with a book of fairy tales he'd found on his shelves. She looked so small in the massive chair, her pink dress wrinkled from the day's events, her dark hair falling across her face as she read. Matthew sat across from her, ostensibly working on his laptop, but really just watching his daughter. His daughter. The phrase still felt surreal, like something from a dream he might wake up from at any moment. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. David appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted and more than a little frazzled. "The guests are gone," he reported quietly. "The vendors are packing up. And Brielle?" "What about Brielle?" David grimaced. "She's in the master bedroom, packing, and making a lot of noise about it. I think she's throwing things." Matthew nodded. He'd expected as much. "Let her. Just make sure she doesn't take anything that doesn't belong to her." "Already on it. Security is keeping an eye on things." David glanced at Elena, who was pretending to read but was obviously listening to every word. "Can we talk?" Matthew looked at his daughter. "Elena, would you like to see the kitchen? I bet the staff could find you some cookies." Her face lit up. "Chocolate chip. If we're lucky." A few minutes later, with Elena safely ensconced in the kitchen with Mrs. Patterson, the head cook who was already fussing over her like a grandmother, Matthew and David retreated to the study. "Okay," David said, closing the door behind them. "What the hell is going on? And please tell me you're not having some kind of midlife crisis breakdown." Matthew poured himself a scotch from the bar cart, then thought better of it and set it down untouched. He needed to stay clear-headed. He had a daughter to think about now. "It's not a breakdown," he said. "It's the opposite of a breakdown. You just walked out on your wedding for a kid you've never seen before. A kid who's my daughter." David held up his hands. "I'm not judging. I'm just trying to understand. You really believe that letter?" Matthew pulled the wrinkled envelope from his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying it like a talisman, proof that this wasn't some elaborate hoax or fever dream. "I believe it because I know it's true." He handed the letter to David. "Read it." David scanned the pages, his expression growing more serious with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Matthew with something like awe. "Jesus, Matt. Lila Chun. I remember her." "You do?" "Of course I do. You were crazy about her. Head over heels, write poetry in your sleep crazy about her. And then one day she was just gone. You never talked about what happened." Matthew sank into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 53 years. "My parents happened," he said quietly. "They made it very clear that she wasn't suitable. Wrong background, wrong social class, wrong everything. They threatened to cut me off, disown me, destroy her life if I didn't end things. And you listened to them." I was 28 years old and still afraid of disappointing mommy and daddy. The self-disgust in Matthew's voice was palpable. "I thought I was being practical, responsible. I told myself I could find someone else, someone they approved of. But you never did." "Not really." Matthew was quiet for a long moment. "No, I never did. Every woman I dated after Lila, there was always something missing. Some spark that I couldn't recapture." "Including Brielle?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Matthew thought about his fiancée, his ex-fiancée, and tried to remember what had attracted him to her in the first place. Her beauty, certainly. Her sophistication. The way she looked perfect on his arm at charity galas and business dinners. But love? Real, deep, soul-stirring love like he'd felt with Lila? Brielle was convenient, he admitted. She fit the image my family wanted. She was everything they thought I should want in a wife. But not what you wanted. I convinced myself it was what I wanted. I convinced myself that the kind of love I had with Lila was just youthful infatuation. That mature love was supposed to be calmer, more practical." David shook his head. "And now I realize I was lying to myself. I settled for Brielle because I thought I didn't deserve better. Because I thought I'd already lost my chance at real happiness when I let Lila go." A crash from upstairs made both men wince. It sounded like something expensive had just met an unfortunate end. "Brielle's not taking this well," David observed. "No, she's not." Matthew ran a hand through his hair. "I should probably go talk to her." "Are you sure that's a good idea? She seemed pretty volatile when I left her." Another crash, followed by what sounded like creative profanity, echoed through the house. "I owe her that much," Matthew said. "I can't just let her destroy my house." "Want backup?" Matthew almost smiled. "I think I can handle one angry ex-fiancée." Famous last words. Matthew found Brielle in the master bedroom, surrounded by suitcases, shopping bags, and what looked like the remains of several expensive vases. She'd changed out of her wedding dress into a sleek black outfit that somehow made her look more dangerous than beautiful. She looked up when he entered, her eyes flashing with fury and something that might have been desperation. Well, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The devoted father comes to check on his abandoned bride. Brielle, we need to talk. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, now you want to talk? After humiliating me in front of 200 people? After choosing some random child over the woman who was about to become your wife? She's not some random child. She's my daughter. So you keep saying. Brielle picked up a picture frame from the dresser, their engagement photo, and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, sending glass across the hardwood floor. But I notice you haven't demanded a DNA test. Haven't asked for any proof beyond a convenient letter that anyone could have written. Matthew felt his patience wearing thin. The proof is in her face, Brielle. She has my eyes, my chin, your desperation to believe in fairy tales. Brielle stepped closer, her voice dropping to a purr. Matthew, darling, think about this rationally. You're a billionaire. You're a target. And this little girl shows up on our wedding day, with a sob story designed to tug at your heartstrings. Doesn't that seem just a little too convenient? Despite himself, Matthew felt a flicker of doubt. Not about Elena. He knew in his bones that she was his daughter, but about the timing. Why today? Why now? Brielle saw the uncertainty in his expression and pounced on it like a predator scenting weakness. I've seen this before, she said, moving closer until she was almost touching him. Wealthy men who get taken in by professional con artists. They target men like you. Lonely, successful, with more money than sense. I'm not lonely. Aren't you? Her voice was soft now, seductive. You were lonely when I met you, Matthew. Lonely and lost, and looking for something you couldn't even name. I gave you companionship, partnership, a future. And you're throwing it all away for what? A fantasy. She reached up and touched his face with fingers that were soft and familiar. It's not too late, she whispered. We can fix this. We can have the wedding in a few months, somewhere private. Let this whole ugly mess die down. As for the child, as for Elena, what? Brielle's smile was sharp as a blade. We'll handle her properly. Get a DNA test, have her checked out by private investigators. When it turns out she's not actually your daughter, we'll make sure she gets placed somewhere appropriate. No harm done. Matthew stared at the woman he'd been about to marry, feeling like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. The calculation in her eyes, the coldness beneath the beauty, the complete lack of empathy for a frightened, orphan child. And if she is my daughter? Brielle's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. Then we'll deal with that too. Boarding school, nannies, whatever it takes to keep her out of our lives. You didn't know she existed for 10 years, Matthew. You can go back to not knowing. The words hit him like a physical blow. The casual cruelty of it. The assumption that he would be willing to abandon his own child for the sake of convenience. Get out. Brielle blinked. What? Get out of my house. Now. Her composure cracked completely. Matthew, you're not thinking clearly. You're emotional, you're confused. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. He moved toward the door, opening it wide. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave. Anything you leave behind will be donated to charity. You can't be serious. Brielle's voice rose to a shriek. Matthew, I love you. We're supposed to be married. We're supposed to be starting our life together. You don't love me, Matthew said quietly. You love my bank account. You love the lifestyle I can provide. But you don't love me, and you sure as hell don't love my daughter. She's not your daughter. Brielle screamed. She's a con artist. A little grifter who's playing you like a violin. Matthew turned back to look at her one last time. The woman he'd thought he was going to spend the rest of his life with. The woman he'd convinced himself he loved. Even if that were true, he said, the fact that you could look at a scared, orphan child and see nothing but a threat tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. He started to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Brielle, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasted 3 years of your life. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you thought you were marrying. And I'm sorry it took a 10-year-old girl to show me who you really are. Behind him, Brielle's scream of rage echoed through the mansion like a battle cry. But Matthew was already walking away, toward the kitchen, toward his daughter, toward a future he was only just beginning to imagine. Matthew found Elena exactly where he'd left her, perched on a stool at the kitchen island with a plate of chocolate chip cookies and a glass of milk. Mrs. Patterson hovered nearby like a protective mother hen, periodically refilling the cookie plate and asking if Elena needed anything else. Everything all right, sir? Mrs. Patterson asked quietly when she saw Matthew's expression. It will be, he said. Mrs. Patterson, I'd like you to prepare the blue guest room for Elena. She'll be staying with us. The older woman's face broke into a warm smile. Of course, sir. Will she be needing anything specific? Clothes, toys, books. Matthew realized he had no idea what a 10-year-old girl might need. His knowledge of children was limited to writing checks for various children's charities. Actually raising a child? That was uncharted territory. We'll figure it out, he said. Elena looked up from her cookies, her face slightly smudged with chocolate. I have clothes, she said quietly. In my backpack. And Mommy's book. Your backpack. She nodded toward a small, worn backpack sitting by the kitchen door. Matthew's heart clenched as he realized that this bag probably contained everything Elena owned in the world. Where have you been staying? He asked gently. Mrs. Rodriguez took care of me after Mommy went to heaven, Elena said matter-of-factly. But she has 5 kids already, and her husband said they couldn't keep me forever. She helped me find you, though. She looked you up on the internet and everything. Matthew made a mental note to send Mrs. Rodriguez a very generous check and probably a car. Well, he said, sitting down on the stool next to Elena, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You're home now. Elena's eyes widened. Really? I can stay forever if you want to. For a moment, Elena just stared at him. Then her face crumpled, and she launched herself into his arms, wrapping her small arms around his neck and holding on like she was afraid he might disappear. I wanted a daddy so much, she whispered against his shoulder. Mommy said I had one somewhere, but I thought maybe he wouldn't want me. Matthew held her tight, feeling something inside his chest crack open and heal at the same time. I've wanted you too, he said softly. I just didn't know it yet. Mrs. Patterson discreetly wiped her eyes with her apron and bustled off to prepare Elena's room, muttering something about getting those linens aired out proper. Are you sad about the lady in the pretty dress? Elena asked, pulling back to look at his face. Matthew considered the question seriously. Was he sad about Brielle? About the end of their relationship? About the wedding that would never happen? No, he said, surprised by how true it felt. I'm not sad about her. I'm sad that it took me so long to see who she really was. And I'm sad that she said mean things to you. Elena nodded solemnly. She was really angry. Yes, she was. But that's not your fault, sweetheart. Sometimes adults make bad choices when they're angry, and that's on them, not on you. Mommy used to say that too. When the neighbors would be mean about me not having a daddy. She said some people just have angry hearts. The simple wisdom of it hit Matthew like a revelation. Some people just have angry hearts. Like Brielle, who couldn't see past her own wants and needs to show compassion to a frightened child. Like his parents, who had valued social status over their son's happiness. But not Elena. Despite everything she'd been through, losing her mother, being shuttled between temporary caregivers, facing rejection and cruelty, she still had hope in her eyes. Still had room in her heart for love. Your mommy sounds like she was very wise, Matthew said. She was. She painted pictures too. Really pretty ones. Elena's voice grew wistful. I have one in my backpack. The only one I could carry. I'd love to see it. Elena scrambled down from her stool and retrieved her backpack. It was even smaller than Matthew had thought, barely big enough to hold a few changes of clothes and some treasured possessions. She pulled out a small canvas, maybe 8 by 10 inches, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. When she unwrapped it, Matthew's breath caught in his throat. It was a painting of a little girl, clearly Elena, sitting in a garden full of sunflowers. But the girl in the painting wasn't alone. Next to her sat a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, his hand resting protectively on the child's shoulder. The man looked exactly like Matthew. Mommy painted this, he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Elena nodded. She said she painted you the way she remembered you. She said you had the kindest eyes she ever saw. Matthew stared at the painting, at this vision of a life that might have been. Lila had painted him into their daughter's life even when he wasn't there. Had made sure Elena knew what her father looked like, what kind of man he was supposed to be. She painted you like you were already part of our family, Elena said quietly. Even though I never met you before today. The words broke something loose inside Matthew's chest. All these years, he'd thought he was alone. He'd built walls around his heart, convinced himself that the kind of deep, soul-stirring love he'd felt with Lila was a once-in-a-lifetime thing that he'd lost forever. But he hadn't lost it. It had been here all along, in this little girl who carried his eyes and his stubborn chin and his capacity for hope even in the darkest moments. "Elena," he said, "would you like to see some pictures of your mommy and me? From when we were young." Her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You have pictures? I have a whole box of them." I never could bring myself to throw them away. 20 minutes later, they were sitting on the floor of Matthew's study, surrounded by photo albums and loose pictures that Matthew had kept hidden away for 10 years. Elena pored over each image like she was memorizing every detail. "You both look so happy," she said, holding up a picture of Matthew and Lila at a street fair, both of them laughing at something off camera. "We were," Matthew said. "Your mother. She made everything brighter, more fun, more alive. She used to tell me stories about you," Elena said, "about how you would take her to art museums and buy her ice cream and listen to her talk about her paintings for hours and hours." Matthew smiled at the memory. She could talk about art forever. "I loved watching her face when she got excited about a new technique or a painting she'd discovered. She'd get this light in her eyes." "I get that too," Elena said excitedly. "When I draw or when I see something really pretty." Mrs. Rodriguez said, "I have artist eyes, just like Mommy." "You like to draw?" Elena nodded enthusiastically. "I'm not as good as Mommy was, but I practice every day. I draw birds mostly, and flowers, and sometimes people, but those are harder." Matthew felt a surge of pride and connection. His daughter was an artist, just like her mother. She carried that creative spark, that way of seeing the world that had first made him fall in love with Lila. "Would you like to see your mother's studio?" he asked impulsively. Elena's eyes widened. "She had a studio?" "She did. I kept it exactly the way she left it. I couldn't bear to change anything." It was true. After Lila had disappeared from his life, Matthew had been unable to bring himself to clear out the small studio space he'd set up for her in his apartment. When he'd moved to the mansion, he'd had everything carefully transported and recreated in one of the upstairs rooms. For 10 years, it had been his secret shrine to a lost love. Now, maybe, it could be something else entirely. Elena's hand slipped into his as they climbed the stairs together. "Daddy," she said quietly. The word stopped Matthew in his tracks. She'd called him Daddy. Not Mr. Matthew, not Sir, but Daddy, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad I found you." Matthew squeezed her small hand gently. "I'm glad you found me too." The studio was exactly as Lila had left it 10 years ago. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, some half-completed, all of them vibrant with life and color. Tubes of paint were scattered across the work table, along with brushes of every size and shape. The north-facing window let in perfect natural light, just the way Lila had always preferred. Elena stood in the doorway, her mouth hanging open in wonder. "She made all these?" she whispered. Matthew nodded, his throat tight with memory. "Every single one." Elena moved through the room like she was walking through a cathedral, approaching each painting with reverence and awe. There were landscapes that seemed to glow with inner light, portraits that captured not just faces but souls, abstract pieces that swirled with emotion and movement. And then she stopped in front of a painting that made Matthew's heart skip a beat. It was him, a portrait he'd never seen before, painted with such love and attention to detail that he could almost feel Lila's presence in the room. But this wasn't the young Matthew from their photographs. This was him as he was now, older, more serious, with lines around his eyes and silver threading through his hair. "She painted this after she left," he realized out loud. Elena nodded. "She painted lots of pictures of you. She said it helped her remember the good times when she was missing you too much." The casual way Elena said it, like missing him had been a constant ache in her mother's life, hit Matthew like a physical blow. All these years, he'd thought Lila had left because she didn't love him enough to fight for their relationship. But maybe she'd left because she loved him too much to trap him in a choice between her and his family. Maybe she'd been just as heartbroken as he was. "There's something else," Elena said quietly. She walked to an easel in the corner that was covered with a paint-stained cloth. "Mommy was working on this before she got too sick. She made me promise to show it to you, if I ever found you." With careful hands, Elena pulled away the cloth. Matthew's knees nearly buckled. It was a family portrait. Him, Lila, and Elena, sitting together in the garden from the painting Elena had shown him earlier. But this time, all three of them were together, Lila's hand resting on Matthew's arm while Elena sat between them, her face bright with happiness. It was the family they could have been, should have been, the life that pride and fear and other people's expectations had stolen from them. She painted our whole family, Elena said softly, even though we were never all together like this. She said someday, maybe we would be. Matthew sank into the chair by the easel, overwhelmed by the weight of 10 years of lost time. 10 years of missed bedtime stories and scraped knees and birthday parties. 10 years of Elena growing up without knowing her father. 10 years of Lila raising their daughter alone, painting imaginary family portraits and hoping for a reunion that she'd never live to see. I failed her, he said quietly. I failed both of you. Elena climbed onto his lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Mommy didn't think so, she said firmly. She said you were just scared, and scared people sometimes make mistakes. But she said you were still good inside, and good people can always find their way back to love. The simple faith in Elena's voice, faith in him, faith passed down from her mother, broke something open inside Matthew's chest. How had he gotten so lucky? How had he deserved this second chance? She was right about one thing, he said, holding his daughter close. I was scared. Scared of disappointing people, scared of making the wrong choice, scared of not being good enough. But I'm not scared anymore. You're not. No, because I have something worth being brave for now. Elena pulled back to look at him, her dark eyes serious. What's that? You, Matthew said simply. I have you. They sat there for a long moment, surrounded by Lila's paintings, surrounded by the dreams and hopes she'd never given up on even when everything seemed impossible. Daddy, Elena said eventually. Yes. Can I paint here sometimes? In Mommy's studio. Matthew felt tears prick at his eyes. I think your mommy would love that. And maybe you could learn to paint too? We could paint together. The idea of Matthew Langford, billionaire businessman, learning to paint alongside his 10-year-old daughter was so absurd that it made him laugh. But it was also the most appealing thing he'd heard in years. I'd like that very much, he said. Really, really. Though I should warn you, I'm probably terrible at it. Elena giggled, the first genuinely happy sound he'd heard from her all day. That's okay. Mommy said the best part about art isn't being good at it. It's about putting your heart on the canvas. Matthew looked around the studio, at the evidence of Lila's heart scattered across dozens of canvases. Her love for him, for Elena, for life itself, captured in paint and light and color. Maybe it was time to put his own heart on canvas. To stop being afraid of feelings that were too big, too messy, too real for the carefully controlled world he'd built around himself. Maybe it was time to start living like the man Lila had painted in all those portraits. The man she believed he could be, even when he'd stopped believing it himself. Come on, he said, standing up with Elena still in his arms. Let's go see your room. And then maybe we can order some pizza and figure out what we're going to do with the rest of our lives. Elena's face lit up. Pizza? Really? Really? Though I should probably warn you, I've never ordered pizza for a 10-year-old before. You'll have to teach me what kind you like. I like everything except mushrooms, Elena said seriously. Mushrooms are gross. Noted. No mushrooms. As they left the studio together, Matthew felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about the future. Not the careful, planned excitement of business deals and social expectations, but the wild, unpredictable joy of not knowing what tomorrow might bring. For the first time in his adult life, he was about to find out what it meant to put someone else's needs before his own. What it meant to love someone so completely that their happiness became more important than his comfort, his reputation, his carefully constructed image. He was about to learn what it meant to be a father. Elena's new room was perfect. Mrs. Patterson had worked miracles in the few hours since Matthew had asked her to prepare it. The blue guest room had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Soft white curtains, a canopy bed with pale blue linens, and a bookshelf already stocked with age-appropriate novels and picture books. It's beautiful, Elena breathed, standing in the doorway with her small backpack clutched in her hands. You really like it? Matthew asked, suddenly worried that it might be too much, too fancy for a little girl who'd been living with a family that already had 5 children. I love it. I've never had a room this pretty before. The simple statement hit Matthew like a punch to the chest. His daughter who should have grown up with every advantage money could buy, had never had a beautiful room of her own. Well, it's yours now, he said gently. For as long as you want it. Elena set her backpack on the bed and began unpacking with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. A few changes of clothes, all clean but clearly well worn. A small stuffed rabbit that looked like it had been loved nearly to pieces. A journal with a purple cover. And carefully wrapped in an old t-shirt, 3 more small paintings that Lila had done. "These are beautiful," Matthew said, examining the paintings. One was a sunset over water, another was a field of wildflowers, and the third was a portrait of Elena as a baby, sleeping peacefully. "Mommy gave them to me before she went to the hospital the last time," Elena said quietly. "She said they were mine to keep forever, so I'd always have something beautiful to look at when I was sad." Matthew had to turn away for a moment, overwhelmed by the image of Lila, sick and dying, making sure her daughter would have something to comfort her after she was gone. "Your mother was very thoughtful," he managed. "She was the best mommy in the world," Elena said with quiet certainty. "Even when she was sick, she still made me breakfast and helped me with my homework and read me stories at bedtime." "What kind of stories did she like to read?" Elena's face brightened. "All kinds. Fairy tales and adventure stories and funny books about talking animals. But her favorite was this one story about a little girl who goes on a journey to find her father, and when she finds him, they live happily ever after." Matthew's throat tightened. Even in her final days, Lila had been preparing Elena for this moment, filling her with hope and courage for the journey that would lead her to him. "That sounds like a good story," he said softly. "It is. And the best part is, it came true." The simple faith in Elena's voice, her absolute conviction that she was living in her own fairy tale now, made Matthew's chest ache with emotions he couldn't even name. A knock on the door interrupted the moment. Mrs. Patterson appeared with an armload of fresh towels and a warm smile. "I thought Miss Elena might like these," she said, setting the towels on the dresser. "And dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. Nothing fancy tonight. Just chicken and rice, since I thought you might want something simple after such an eventful day." "That sounds perfect, Mrs. Patterson. Thank you." The older woman paused at the door. "If I may say so, sir, it's lovely to have a child in the house again. It's been far too quiet around here for far too long." After she left, Elena looked up at Matthew with curious eyes. "Have there been other kids here before?" "No," Matthew said. "Mrs. Patterson was probably thinking about when I was young. I grew up in this house." "You lived here when you were little?" "I did. This was my parents' house, and their parents' house before that. It's been in the Langford family for almost 100 years." Elena's eyes widened. "Wow, that's a really long time. Were you happy here?" The question caught Matthew off guard. Had he been happy here? He remembered long, formal dinners where children were seen but not heard. Tutors and boarding schools and expectations that felt like chains around his neck. A childhood spent trying to live up to standards that seemed impossible to meet. "Sometimes," he said honestly, "but I think it's going to be much happier now that you're here." Elena beamed at him, then walked to the window that looked out over the gardens. "It's really pretty," she said. "All those flowers and trees. At Mrs. Rodriguez's house, we could only see the parking lot from my window. Would you like to explore the gardens tomorrow? There's a maze and a pond with ducks, and lots of places to sit and draw if you want to." "Really? Ducks? Really? And if you're very good, maybe we can convince them to let you feed them." Elena clapped her hands together in delight. This is the best day ever. Looking at his daughter's radiant face, Matthew realized she was right. Despite the chaos, despite the humiliation of the ruined wedding, despite everything, this was the best day ever. Because this was the day he got his daughter back. "Come on," he said, offering Elena his hand. "Let's go have dinner. And you can tell me more about what you like to do for fun." As they walked down the grand staircase together, Elena's small hand in his, Matthew caught a glimpse of their reflection in the hallway mirror. Father and daughter, walking side by side, looking for all the world like they belonged together. For the first time in years, Matthew felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 weeks later, Matthew stood in the doorway of Lila's studio and watched his daughter paint. Elena had claimed the space as her own with the easy confidence of a child who'd finally found where she belonged. Her paintings covered a corner of one wall, flowers and birds and abstract swirls of color that somehow captured more emotion than many professional works Matthew had seen. But today she was working on something different, something that made his chest tight with pride and wonder. She was painting him, not from a photograph, but from life. as he sat in the chair by the window reading the morning paper. Her small tongue poked out slightly as she concentrated, her brush moving with sure, confident strokes that reminded him so much of her mother it took his breath away. "How's it coming along?" he asked softly, not wanting to break her concentration. "Good," Elena said without looking away from her canvas. "I'm trying to get your eyes right." Mommy always said eyes were the hardest part because they have to show what someone's feeling inside. "What do you think I'm feeling inside?" Elena paused, tilting her head to study his face with the serious intensity of a true artist. "Happy," she said finally, "but also a little sad. Like you're remembering something that makes you smile and cry at the same time." The accuracy of her observation hit him like a physical blow. That was exactly how he felt most days now. Overwhelmed with joy at having Elena in his life, but heartbroken over all the years they'd lost. All the moments Lila had experienced alone. "You're very perceptive," he said. "Mommy said I get that from you. She said you always notice things other people missed." Matthew set down his paper and walked over to see Elena's work in progress. The painting was remarkable, not just technically, though her skill was impressive for a 10-year-old, but emotionally. She'd captured something in his expression that he hadn't even realized he was feeling. "It's beautiful, Elena. You have real talent." She beamed at the praise, then grew serious again. "Do you think Mommy would be proud of me?" "I think," Matthew said carefully, "that your mother would be incredibly proud of the amazing, brave, talented little girl you've become. And I think she'd be happy to know that you're safe and loved and home where you belong." Elena nodded solemnly, then went back to her painting. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Elena painting, Matthew pretending to read, but really just enjoying the peaceful domesticity of the moment. It had taken some adjustment, learning to live with a child. The house that had once been silent and perfectly ordered was now filled with laughter and music and the constant chatter of a 10-year-old discovering her new world. Elena's belongings had gradually spread throughout the mansion. Art supplies in the study, books on every surface, the stuffed rabbit that traveled with her everywhere. Matthew loved every chaotic, wonderful minute of it. "Daddy," Elena said eventually. "Yes, sweetheart. Mrs. Patterson told me that lady. The one from the wedding. She kept calling and trying to come back." Matthew's jaw tightened. Brielle had indeed been persistent in her attempts to reconcile, though her motives seemed more financial than romantic. His lawyer had finally had to send her a cease and desist letter. "She did," he said carefully, "but she won't be bothering us anymore." "Good," Elena said firmly. "I didn't like how mean she was. You don't have to worry about her anymore. It's just you and me now." Elena was quiet for a moment, her brush moving thoughtfully across the canvas. "Do you miss her?" she asked finally. The question surprised him. He'd expected Elena to ask about her mother, about his past relationship with Lila. But she was asking about Brielle, the woman who'd tried to have her thrown out like garbage. "No," he said honestly. "I thought I would, but I don't. I think I was more attached to the idea of her than to who she really was." "What do you mean?" Matthew considered how to explain complicated adult relationships to a 10-year-old. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "people pretend to be something they're not because they think that's what other people want. And sometimes other people let themselves be fooled because it's easier than looking too closely." Elena nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. Like when kids at school pretend to be nice to the teacher but are really mean to other kids. Exactly like that. Mommy always said the most important thing was to be kind, even when nobody was watching. She said that's how you know if someone has a good heart. Matthew thought about Brielle's cruelty to Elena, about his parents' dismissal of Lila, about all the people in his life who'd shown their true colors when it mattered most. "Your mother was right," he said. "She was right about a lot of things. She was right about you too," Elena said softly. "She said you were the kind of person who would always try to do the right thing, even if it was hard." Matthew felt tears prick at his eyes. Even after everything, after he'd let fear and family pressure drive away the woman he loved, Lila had still believed in him, had still painted him as the hero in their daughter's story. "I hope I can live up to that," he said. Elena set down her brush and turned to face him fully. "You already are, Daddy. You chose me over that mean lady. You gave me a home and a family and all this." She gestured around the studio, at the house beyond. "But most of all, you chose love over being scared." The wisdom in her words, wisdom that could only have come from Lila, hit Matthew like a revelation. He had chosen love over fear. After years of making decisions based on what other people expected, what looked good on paper, what seemed safe and practical, he'd finally chosen what his heart wanted. And his heart wanted this little girl who painted with her mother's hands and saw the world with eyes full of hope and forgiveness. "Come here," he said, opening his arms. Elena ran to him, paint-stained fingers and all, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and artist's paint, and something indefinable that was purely Elena. "I love you, sweetheart," he said into her hair. So much. "I love you too, Daddy." Outside the studio windows, the sun was setting over the gardens, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have made Lila smile. And Matthew realized that this moment, this feeling, this perfect, imperfect life, was what he'd been searching for all along. He'd just been looking in all the wrong places. The garden party was in full swing. A year to the day after the wedding that never was. Matthew stood on the terrace of his mansion and watched Elena run through the gardens with a dozen other children, their laughter echoing across the manicured lawns like music. It was Elena's adoption celebration, not that the legal papers had been necessary. She'd been his daughter from the moment she'd walked into that wedding ceremony with her crumpled letter and her brave heart. But Elena had wanted to make it official, and Matthew had been happy to oblige. "She looks happy," David said, joining Matthew on the terrace with 2 glasses of champagne. "She is happy," Matthew replied, accepting the drink but not taking his eyes off his daughter. "We both are." It had been a remarkable year. Elena had enrolled in the local private school, where her artistic talents had quickly made her a favorite among teachers and students alike. She'd made friends, joined the art club, and even convinced Matthew to volunteer as a chaperone for their field trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The house had come alive in ways Matthew had never imagined possible. There were piano lessons and art classes and sleepovers with Elena's new friends. There were scraped knees and homework struggles and bedtime stories that sometimes stretched past midnight, because Elena just had to know how the story ended. There were also quiet moments. Elena curled up in Matthew's study while he worked, both of them comfortable in each other's presence. Afternoons in Lila's studio, where they painted side by side and talked about everything and nothing. Evening walks through the gardens, where Elena would point out interesting bugs or flowers and Matthew would make up elaborate stories about their secret lives. It was chaotic and messy and absolutely perfect. "Any word from Brielle?" David asked casually. Matthew shook his head. "Nothing in the last 6 months. I think she's finally accepted that it's over." Actually, Matthew had heard through mutual acquaintances that Brielle had married a tech mogul from Silicon Valley just 3 months after their wedding debacle. Apparently, she'd bounced back from heartbreak with remarkable speed. "Good riddance," David said. "I never liked her anyway. You never said anything. You seemed happy. Or at least, you thought you were happy. There's a difference." Matthew considered this. Had he been happy with Brielle? He'd been comfortable, certainly. Satisfied with the image they presented to the world. But happy? Real, deep down, soul-stirring happy? "I didn't know what real happiness felt like," he admitted. "Not until Elena." "She's changed you," David observed. "In all the best ways." It was true. Matthew barely recognized the man he'd been a year ago, focused entirely on business and social obligations, living his life according to other people's expectations. Now he left the office early to attend Elena's art shows. He'd learned to braid hair and make pancakes and sing lullabies that his own mother had never bothered to learn. He'd learned what it meant to love someone more than himself. "Daddy," Elena's voice called from across the garden. She was running toward him, her party dress grass-stained and her hair escaping from its careful braids, looking absolutely radiant. "What is it, sweetheart? Come see. Mrs. Patterson made a cake that looks exactly like one of Mommy's paintings." Elena grabbed his hand and tugged him toward the party tent, where indeed Mrs. Patterson had outdone herself with a cake decorated to look like Lila's sunflower garden painting, the one where she'd imagined their family all together. "It's beautiful," Matthew said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think Mommy would have loved it," Elena said thoughtfully. "I think she would have loved this whole party. And she would have been so happy that we found each other." Matthew knelt down so he was at Elena's eye level. Around them, the party continued, children playing, adults chatting, the normal sounds of celebration and joy. "You know what I think?" he said softly. "What?" "I think your mommy is watching right now. And I think she's smiling." Elena's face lit up with pure happiness. Really, really, because her brave, amazing little girl found her way home. And because we're finally the family she always painted us to be. Elena threw her arms around his neck, squeezing tight. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Elena. More than all the stars in the sky. As the sun set over the garden party, Matthew held his daughter close and felt a peace he'd never known before. The life he'd planned, the safe, predictable, socially appropriate life, was gone forever. And in its place was something infinitely better. A life built on love, on second chances, on the courage to choose what mattered most over what looked best on paper. It had taken a 10-year-old girl with paint-stained fingers and her mother's eyes to teach him the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the biggest disruptions. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to your carefully planned life is for a brave little girl to walk into it and change everything forever. As Elena ran back to rejoin her friends, Matthew smiled and raised his champagne glass in a silent toast. To Lila, who had loved them both enough to make this moment possible. To Elena, who had been brave enough to find her way home. And to second chances, which sometimes came wrapped in faded pink dresses and carried in small, determined hands. The wedding that never happened had led to the family he'd never known he was missing. And that, Matthew thought as he watched his daughter dance in the garden where she'd first appeared like a miracle, was the best trade he'd ever made. In the years that followed, Elena would grow up to become a renowned artist, her work displayed in galleries around the world. She would paint families and love stories and second chances, always signing her work, Elena Langford Chin, in honor of both parents who had shaped her heart. And Matthew would never stop being grateful for that day when his perfectly planned life fell apart and his perfectly imperfect family began. Because sometimes, the most beautiful stories start with the bravest interruptions. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.